So, welcome to the show, Morenike. It's so nice to have you today.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I really thought that this discussion was important about autism and its intersection with race because it's just one that is not talked about as much. There are many discussions on autism in general, but not as many about its correlation and its intersection with race. So, just to kind of get started here, you were late diagnosed with autism as an adult. So I'm curious to know what it was like as a child going through your childhood, because childhood has its own set of issues anyways. So what
Yes.
was that like, just living with the diagnosis that you didn't even know had a title to it?
Oh my goodness. It's like, I think about, scripting and the cliche hindsight is 2020. Like now it makes a lot of sense about, it makes so many things about my childhood make sense. But I think about growing up. So I always knew I was different, but I didn't know what the difference was. And it was very hard to try to put my finger on it. And at different periods of my life, I tried to figure out what it might be. Okay, well, maybe it's because I'm the only girl and I have brothers, so I'm not as girly as some girls. Or maybe it's because I'm Black and a lot of people around me, we moved around a lot when I was little. We lived in the Midwest and then we moved to Texas later. And I was, okay, maybe it's because I'm Black and, not a whole lot of people of color and then a lot of the schools that I attended. And so maybe that's the reason. Or maybe it's because my parents are immigrants. So, I'm Black, but I'm different. Food is different, name is different, celebrate different holidays. Then I was in gifted and talented classes. And so that also, made, everybody in there is a little off and weird. So I always knew something was different with me and my classmates, but I couldn't put together what it was. And so it made me feel, like growing up. So there was a part of me that thought that a lot of the things that I thought and felt were what everybody thought and felt. And then I came to realize that that wasn't the case. Like everybody else didn't hear the air conditioned ping or the clock, like the analog clock clicking. And they would maybe hear it when they first come in the classroom, but they wouldn't continue to hear it. Everyone else didn't have tags that bothered their whole, to the point, their skin to the point where you'd rip the tag out, or have hairstyles that felt uncomfortable touching your skin or your face or your ears. I would say things and people would laugh and I wasn't even trying to be funny, but I was like, okay. I would annoy adults when I was, they think I was being rude or when I wasn't trying to be, I was just trying to talk. And, just so there were so many things about it. Just felt like there was this invisible script that everybody had that I didn't have about life. And in so many, and I know that that's the way that's for a lot of us who are, people of color, that's our lives when we're out in the mainstream. But at least when you come in your home setting, family or your community, at least there, no more code switching. You can be you. You can have somewhat of a sense of, okay, here, maybe over there, I'm alien. Here, my name isn't odd, or here I'm not weird, or here the way it's. But even in my own place, though I felt loved, I still felt other even there. So it was different. It definitely, I felt like, what is it about me that I just can't get these small things that everybody else can get? And why can't people figure this out? And then also, why isn't this, people notice this? Or why is this odd to say? Or why is this odd to do? It was really weird. Like I think that now that I look back, there's so many things that are just so textbook autism, from my communication, my sensory differences. Some of the things that I like to do over and over and over, like, music I like to listen to over and over, or I think books that I would read over and over, or always scripted things from books and movies and shows, but I just didn't know there was a name for it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And so then, from my understanding, at some point, there was an anger and resentment that was built up. And you wrote that you were angry at injustices and disparities, apathetic attitudes, but then you channeled your anger into action, and
Mhm.
eventually that anger subsided.
Mhm.
Was there something in particular that happened that made it subside, and why at some point did it ultimately subside?
So it's interesting. I think about the fact that I know there, in the autistic community, and I refer myself as autistic as opposed to a person with autism, because for me, just like I'm a Black woman, I'm not a person with, the gender identity of a woman, and I'm not a person with Blackness. Those are parts of my identity. They're not the only thing about me, but they're central, core aspects of my identity. And my being autistic is as well. It colors everything, the way I think, feel, believe. And so some people just like the term special interest, because they're saying, what's so special about it? Like they feel like it's patronizing. But I guess one hallmark of autism is having these very passionate, intense interests in certain things. And sometimes it'll be one thing, and then maybe in life it'll be a different thing. But we kind of tend to perseverate, and really those things are our thing, like our big, big interest. And it can be more than one thing. And so for me, because so much of life didn't make sense to me, there were so many things I didn't understand about things. I didn't understand why people would say something that they don't really mean, or do things that were against what they supposedly believe. Like, it just didn't make sense to me. Everything seemed like this double standard. And I guess because I didn't understand things, I gravitated toward things that, and I felt much misunderstood a lot of the time. I gravitated toward things that made sense. And to me, justice made sense. Treating people kindly made sense. If you say that the gender, there's gender equality, or the races are equal, or whatever, then your actions and policies should do that. And everywhere around me, I saw that wasn't the case. I saw that if your income was a certain level, then you got treated one way. If you had connections, you got treated one way. If you spoke a certain way, because then you were treated one way. And I just didn't believe that was the case. And so I guess for me, it made me feel empowered to speak up or fight against things that I thought were unfair. Kind of like, I guess I was always kind of like wanting to be the advocate, the underdog, whether it was the child in class who was being teased because they were, overweight, or whether it was just things in causes. It always seemed so very important to me. And the fact that I didn't understand why people were doing the things that they did, either whether we're talking about countries or individual people, it caused me to want to fight back and want things to be better, and do my part to do it, instead of just be angry, make some change. And I think that's what helped the anger subside, is realizing that I'm not helpless. I might just be one person. My reach is limited, but I can do something. I can say something, and I might influence other people to do something and say something. And so I don't have to just watch things, people be mistreated. I can still do something about it. I don't have to be complicit, in this injustice. And so it was very helpful for me, very therapeutic for me, to use that intense focus that I had to try to just go against the grain if I needed to try to help make things better. And I, kind of jumped, head first into a lot of different types of social justice advocacy in general, about a lot of causes, because I just felt like we needed to do right by others.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned, first off, that you don't necessarily go by people first language, because it's the same way with we don't walk around saying I'm a person who's Black. We say I'm a Black person, or African American, whichever terminology you use. But you also have a third minority title, which is being a woman, right? Black autistic woman. So has that also influenced different things in your life, whether it's advocacy or the way you feel like you're perceived, or the way you go about your life, and even advocating and influencing others? And if so, in what way has being a woman translated?
Oh my goodness, it has been. There's a person named Kayla Smith, who's also a Black autistic young woman in North Carolina, and advocate, and she has described it as being a triple threat. And I love the work of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw with intersectionality, and kind of talking about all of our overlapping oppressed identities that we have, from gender to race to disability, et cetera. And it has definitely been something that has really impacted the way that I advocate, and just even, I think, just the community, the autism community at large, because for a very long time, and even still now, the focus tends to be children. Well, a lot of us, children, every single child, unless they pass away, is going to grow up and be an adult. Childhood is not perpetual. You're going to eventually change into another form. So focusing only on children erases the identity of that autistic child that grows up to be an adult, or that autistic teen or adult who gets their diagnosis late. it's also very whitewashed. And for a very long time, that's why so many, and I believe it's still the case, why so many people of color and women and or other gender minorities, such as, non-binary individuals or agender people, are not diagnosed, because they're looking for, okay, do you act like, this stereotypical character in this or this show, who's usually white, cisgender, sexual male, or boy, and those things, if you don't present in that way, they're not looking for you to be autistic. So whereas that person, that's just how they are, you're maybe the angry Black woman, maybe you're loud and belligerent, when it could be just that autistic people tend not to have this greatest strength at regulating our tone. We're either way too loud or way too quiet, way too fast, way too slow. There's never like a happy medium. It's all in or nothing for us. And so on or off for us. And so being a woman, it's like kind of like, so when people think of autism, they're thinking puzzle pieces, little cute kids, probably blonde, they're thinking, or who knows what they're thinking, but they're typically not expecting to see someone that looks like me. But I'm very much autistic, and fortunately, my children's diagnoses are what led me to find out about myself, because I was misdiagnosed for so many years. And so, but even though they are children, being that they're African American, and particularly my daughter, I think it was only because there's more awareness about autism, and because of how, how obvious her characteristics were, that she was even identified, because I certainly didn't see it myself. And I think that's just I think that there needs to be more voices. I don't think that Temple Grandin and Carrie Magro are representative of the full autism spectrum. They're not great people, but they have their experiences, and others have different experiences, and we lose a lot by making people, by rendering other people invisible.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that brings me then to your book
Yes.
that you co-wrote with two other individuals, All the Weight of Our Dreams, and this an anthology on autism and race. Why was writing this book even important to you in the first place, and co-authoring?
It's hard for me not to smile when I see the book, and I've always felt, social communication is a difference for most autistic people. It's an area where we tend to communicate. Either some people are non-speaking and they might type to communicate as opposed to using their words. But even those people who are speaking, like I'm speaking a lot of the time, but there are many times that I can't form words, and where I will use, now in this digital world, I can use chat boxes or I can email, but there are many. I've always felt that reading and writing were my primary language, because whereas with speaking, all the nuances of eye contact, body language, tone, and how long do you pause, and what do you say, and do you really say when someone says, how are you? Do they care how you are, or are you just supposed to say fine? And how many seconds, do you look up, and, all these different things, and how long do you continue? And, those things are absent in writing. You can express what you mean freely. And so many times I feel like, if I'm having a conversation with someone, I'll walk away thinking, oh my gosh, I'll beat myself up for days. I should have said this, this, or this. But if I was writing, typically I will be able to understand better what's being said, and I'll be able to communicate better. So I grew up, and I'm raising my children, with the principles of neurodiversity, the fact that all human brains are different, and we're, just like we have, different, cultural, identities and all of those things. And there's no one race or culture better than the other. We're all just unique and different. Brains are that way too, whether it's giftedness, dyslexia, dyscalculia, autism, ADHD. And so wanting to raise my children that way, to understand, to not feel bad, not feel like they have this horrible, condition, but this is just a part of who they are, part of their neurology. I have been trying to, I've tried early on to find things about autism, positive things that I could expose them to. And it was very challenging, because a lot of the information out there is like, oh, woe is me, autism is so horrible, but I'm thriving in spite of it, or it's destroying our family, but we'll get through it anyway. Or it just, there was no representation of, women, girls, people of color. I live in the fourth largest city in America. And yet when I go to autism events, everyone knows, oh, you're such and such's mom. because there's not enough, there's not that many people of color, and there's certainly not that many women. So this, as I started to interact more with people in the autistic community, I started to realize that this was an experience that a lot of us had. So people who were biracial, multiracial, Latinx, Black, Asian, Indigenous, et cetera, had similar experiences where, it's never just autism for us, because our autism is autism plus, and so it's never, it's autism plus everything else that you're already dealing with. And so the book was a way, there's all these books out there that are written about, autistic people, not by us. And there's starting to be more that are by us, but there were so few that had anything to do with the experience of being a person of color, And so Lydia XC Brown, it was actually Lydia's brainchild. They came up with this idea, and E. Ashkenazi and I are also involved in, autism advocacy. And so we were brought on board to try to help co-edit this book. And so it's the first anthology ever written by autistic people of color, sharing our thoughts and our perspectives, people from, different countries. It is heavily global north, but we do have contributors from, outside of the US. In the book, we have, youth, we have adults, we have adolescents, senior citizens, and people sharing different experiences, things that we've been through, things that we've thought are, our struggles, our hopes, are, essentially, like the book says, our dreams, living racialized autism. And it's one of the things that I'm the most proud of in my life, is that we've been able to give visibility to people who are often not seen, even though we're right here.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a great book with, just a compilation of great sort of short stories. I think I even saw some poems in there.
Yes, there's some poetry and some artwork. Yes.
Yeah. And so you can really get a better perspective of what it is like to have autism as a Black person, as an Asian American, as someone who's Latinx, whatever the case may be, because like you said, there is sort of an assumption, and I remember doing a speech about this at an event, that the reason why, or at least one of the reasons why, there is such a misdiagnosis or late diagnosis of people of color with autism is because of perceptions, even by the professionals, the physicians who are going to take part in the diagnosis, of thinking that the characteristic, you're not falling within this box of characteristics.
Exactly. They'll be more likely, people of color are more likely, and particularly African Americans, to be diagnosed late or to be misdiagnosed. Oh, that's conduct disorder. Oh, right. That's this. Oh, that's that. Whereas a white person presenting in that same way would be properly assessed and properly diagnosed. We tend to be to get later services later, kind of gaslit, sometimes by professionals. Parents come in and they say they're concerned, and the parents are made to feel like they're a paranoid helicopter parent, and there's really nothing there, or that they need to have better behavioral controls over their children, as opposed to seeing that maybe there are legitimate needs that need to be met because of a disability.
Right, but then also the characteristics that professionals are relying on tend to be based on the research, which was based on research
on little white boys. Exactly. So it's like, it's, on both sides of the coin, you're not there, because they're looking for characteristics. Like, for example, I think about being myself, growing up in a home, I'm a person of color. We grew up in the South, working class. My parents are immigrants. It wasn't a bad thing if I could sit and play by myself. Good. Your child can entertain themselves, because I got to work. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't a bad thing. You know what I mean? If your kid likes to read the same book over and over, well, that's cute, and I'm West African. So if you don't make eye contact, well, that's kind of cultural. It's respect. So whereas the things that a white that are flag a problem on a Black home, they're not, or a Latinx home, whatever, you're more, there are other things that are important to you about the way that your child presents. Your child may not be making spontaneous speech, but they're connected, or that they love. So maybe you're not as concerned about that particular thing, but the other things that you bring up are kind of dismissed by professionals, because I think about the fact that my youngest son actually was diagnosed with Kawasaki disease and nearly died. He has pediatric heart disease to this day because of it, but he was almost not diagnosed because he didn't meet the criteria, meaning, my son is very, very dark skinned. And so the strawberry colored rash didn't look strawberry on his chocolate skin. And his lips and that were swollen and his tongue didn't look the same way they would as the little pictures of the little white boys. It was the labs that allowed us to, to kind of confirm that it was what he had. And so I think there's so many people, that, that are behaving a particular way, and whereas a white child, oh, that's echolalia, they're scripting. A black child, oh, they're mocking somebody, they're, repeating them and, doing the exact same thing, but how is it perceived?
Sure, sure. And so I think this book will help people to, or encourage people to be lifelong learners, which is something that you consider yourself to be a lifelong,
Yes.
which is a lifelong learner. So we are still in COVID, many months later.
Yes.
Is there anything that you have learned about yourself while you've been sort of sheltering in place?
It's really, really interesting because there were some jokes that people made early on in the pandemic about, introverts and people on the spectrum have been physically distancing, for years. And so it's kind of funny because it's like some of these things that people were starting to do, the things we already do. You might already have grocery delivery, because for me, grocery stores are overwhelming. The lights, the sound, the noise, the people, the smells. So it's worth it to get that stuff ahead of time. Or if you have executive functioning issues and memory and things like that, it might be hard to remember what you planned to do or where you plan to go, or just the social aspect of having to talk to the person and check out. Or even when you go to the self-checkout, there might be someone there trying to chat, or, or just, it might just be something or you might just be so drained from your day, working and peopling, that it's hard to make some of these practical things happen. So a lot of these things, and then, again, thinking about the fact that we notice a lot of things that people tend not to notice. So from, the temperature of a room, or sounds or smells that other people don't get. I've always been that way about, like, it was weird to me that people need to be told, don't touch, use, like hand sanitizer, and don't touch this with your hand, and don't do that. I'm thinking, why wouldn't you do that? Because for me, I always noticed, I guess those, again, being, hypersensitive, those were things that I was already cognizant of. But what I found that was very interesting is that what people were experiencing doing, when COVID happened, the sense of helplessness that a lot of people seem to be experiencing when they couldn't talk to people the way they wanted to, or they couldn't go places that they typically wanted to go to, or they had to change the way they were doing everything. I was like, wow, they're experiencing what it's like to be us in their world. Because this is how we feel all the time. Like, everyone's like, oh gosh, this is so overwhelming. I can't do this, or I can't do that. And they didn't understand. And they're thinking that's how we feel every day in this world that's not set up for us. It's the flip side of things. So it's like now everyone is understanding what it's like to not feel a part of your community, or to feel like like you're hindered. And I think that it's been helpful that a lot of people that we've been able to realize that there's different ways to connect, different ways to communicate, different ways to educate and to work. And there's not just a one size fits all. But I also feel that people are taking kind of like the neurotypical way of doing things and imposing it on some of these digital, strategies. So now everybody's on Zoom, but you must have your camera on, or it must be for an hour, or it must be this. And so, it's accessible in a sense, but then it's also inaccessible. It's because people are having small talk for the first 7 minutes of the Zoom meeting, just like you would in a face-to-face meeting. So I think what the pandemic has taught me is that the uncertainty is challenging and difficult, but I think it's really shown me the resilience of our community, that we, what we've been able to, what has, made most people stir crazy for, 9 or 10 months, and we live in a world that's, very hostile for us and not very inclusive of us every single day. And we managed to stay alive.
Yeah, and I completely agree with all of that. I do remember those memes and going around and discussions with about, okay, well, now you see what it's like, join the club, it's things like that. So the last thing I want to talk about, though, are reparations, right? So you're a part and an advocate for reparations, and you're a part of the community reparations for autistic people of color's interdependence, survival, and empowerment. So the word reparations can sort of be a terminology that can gaslit very easily, but I'm very interested in you explaining exactly what that is, what it means, and why that's important to you.
Yes, and so I'll preface by saying my thing is, my volume's weird, but I'll preface by saying that my term has recently ended. So I was a representative. I was the grant selection committee chair for what we call affectionately the fund, or the Autistic People of Color Fund, as an acronym to shorten it, because like you said, it is a long name. And it's a grassroots program, a fund, a micro fund that exists to try to assist autistic people of color, because there are, grants out there to help families, like, okay, are you a family, a caregiver of a child with autism? We can give you respite for this, or we can help you with this, or we can help you with that. There's like nonprofits and grants and programs. There's a lot of things that are challenging for autistic people to access on our own if we're not if we're no longer being cared for by, exclusively by a parent or what have you, if we're on our own, or even if we're interdependent, in a household, a lot of these forms are cumbersome, confusing, bureaucratic, the way that they're worded. They want you to find documents and prove this and prove that. And so we felt that there were people, we know that the statistics prove that tend to have, regardless of educational attainment, tend to have lower, income, are less likely to be homeowners. There's just a lot of economic challenges in general for our community before the pandemic, and, much less during. And so that's even more heightened if you're a person of color, because that's those statistics exist for the autistic adult community in general, not, relevant to, not, exclusive to any particular race. And so this fund was one where we wanted to kind of cut through the bureaucracy. Do you need help? And why should we say you only need help for this thing? Okay, it's only acceptable to get help for this one thing or for this. Maybe you need help for rent, but maybe you need help because you really want to go to a conference and learn something, or you really want to you want some technology that would allow you to communicate better, and some type of adaptive augmentative communication device. Maybe you want to learn coding. Maybe you want to get away from an abuser. Maybe you want to purchase some, weighted blankets and some, sensory items. Maybe your car broke down. Maybe you need medication. Maybe you want to, seek, some help. And so this is a micro grant that gives people between $100 and $500, and they can apply. And it's, obviously it needs to be used for purposes, nothing that's illegal or, unscrupulous, because, it's, a nonprofit organization that is hosting the program, the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. But it was out to help out our peers. We're not going to turn you down because you're asking for, you want to buy comic books, because maybe that's self-care for you. A lot of organizations, if you're not using it for a specific purpose that they feel is a justifiable reason for support or funds, then you're not going to get it. And so the fund has helped so many people, adults, children, people, all parts, all over the globe. And and so although I'm no longer on the team, because it's a volunteer team and the members shift, I definitely recommend and still support the fund. It can be found. So our website for the anthology is autismandrace.com, and there's several tabs, and there's a tab for the Autistic People of Color Fund, and people can apply online. They can, if they need help, like if they need to apply aloud, like we have someone do it through phone, if they need something mailed to them or emailed. We know that people have different needs. If you need a support person to apply on your behalf, because communicating your needs are challenging, we can do that too. And there's a short and a longer form of the application. And so in addition to applying for help, if a person needs help, we also encourage people to donate. All of the funds, 100% of the funds go towards supporting the fund. 90% go directly to the individuals who are granted support, and the other 10% are just administrative fees, sending stuff through PayPal, maintaining a bank account for the money and what have you. And so it's something I'm very, very proud of, because I know that there's so many needs. When you see someone applying because they They don't have, they're like, oh, okay, my child gets free lunch and, free breakfast and free lunch, but I don't eat. I'm living off of Insure and I don't have it anymore. Can I please have some Insure? I live in my car and I need to have some more, I need, my tags to be right because I can't, so I can park here without getting caught. Or, just some of the things are just devastating that you read that people are needing help for, the things that people have been through. It just really, it's very sobering. And so I just, would encourage anyone to donate to the fund. It's tax deductible if they would like to support it, or to provide, or to encourage people, if a person, an autistic person of color, regardless of where they live, regardless of their age, they can apply. We've had little children apply. Mommy might have to help type it out for them, but a little child is really into art and wants to draw, and we could buy arts, send money for art supplies or, different things like that. So we encourage that. And then another project that I'd like to share is, so the anthology, there's another anthology that we have coming out in addition. It's not specifically focused on race, but there are a number of contributors who are people of color, and it's called Sincerely Your Autistic Child: What People on the Autism Spectrum Wish Their Parents Knew About Acceptance, Identity, and Growing Up. And it's being published by Beacon Press, and it's going to come out on time for Autism Acceptance Month, April, but it's available for pre-order now. And so we're highlighting a lot of voices of people of color sharing their experiences. The anthology is a great book. It's also a large book. This is a smaller, more digestible 32-page book that a person can read in, more easily than our anthology that's nearly 3 times that in size. And it's written more of in a narrative form, kind of part memoir, part journal, part love letter to parents and the community.
That's amazing. I think that book will really help a lot of people, not just parents, but also other family members, because other family members can just learn from other people's experiences and learn how to continue, how to move forward in their interactions, and if nothing else, a less judgmental way at a minimum.
Exactly. And one thing that was very important to us in the book is allowing people to express themselves. So I mentioned earlier that I use identity first language, but I understand that person first language for some people is very, very empowering and very, is very radical and very meaningful. And I know that a lot of communities, I think about, for example, the HIV community uses person first language, as opposed, they say person living with HIV to emphasize the fact that it's no longer a death sentence, it's a chronic condition, and that they are living their full lives and it's not, ending them. And so I know that we have contributors in the anthology, the one that's coming out, that call themselves a person with autism or what have you. And because that's how they self-identify. And so I think what's important, especially for people of color who often have been told how we should view ourselves, what we should call ourselves, I think it's important for us to people to be able to have that autonomy to identify as they see fit and be respected in that way.
Well, this was such a great conversation to have. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, this was really great. Thanks for